Welcome, everyone, to another amazing episode of Outside the Studio. My name is Tessa. I'm your host, as usual. I'm really excited to welcome to the show Minda Zetlin, who is the author of Career Self-Care. And she also writes for the Laid Back Leader column. It's part of Inc.com. And so we're going to talk a lot about career self-care today. That's definitely a topic that I feel very passionate about. And we'll kind of, we'll see where this fun conversation leads us. Minda, how are you? And welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. Oh, my pleasure. So I'd love to talk about this idea. Okay. So the three words, career self-care, in one title, nice little package. And when I think about this, I think about this concept that, you talk about it in the book, the idea that the more we indulge in self-care, a lot of us believe, and I'm no exception to this, that the more time we take off, the worse we will do in our careers. Kind of like if you really want to make it in, I'm thinking about from the entrepreneurial lens, you really have to grind, especially the first 5 years, I would say, of a career. This is this belief, this myth that I have. And so I'm wondering why you believe the opposite is true.
Well, to say the opposite is true is probably a bit of exaggeration. If you indulge in self-care, 40 hours a week every day and never go to your work, then yeah, right. But no, seriously though. So in order to answer that question, I feel like I need to take a step back and talk about what self-care is for the purposes of this conversation. Because when we talk about self-care, a lot of people think, scented candles and bubble baths and massages and spa days. I actually had a spa day yesterday. It was lovely. And I love all that stuff. And if you do too, I completely encourage you to do it. But when I talk about self-care in relation to career and self-care in general, in relation to, being alive, it really is more than that. It's all the things that make us feel better, that make us feel fully human. And my shorthand for this is happy, healthy, and at ease. And when we're happy, healthy, and at ease at work, we do better work most of the time. I mean, if your work is like to stand by the side of the road and hold a sign, maybe not. But if your work takes creativity, thought, ideas, learning, then absolutely a happier, healthier human will do that work better.
Yeah. Well, so how do we do that? How do we indulge in self-care? And thank you for defining self-care. I guess I'm wondering, I think about this kind of concept that I borrow from Tim Ferriss often about the idea of the 4-hour work week.
Mm-hmm.
And how we're so used to in this country in particular, and I do feel it's starting to shift, that 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And it feels kind of antiquated to think that that's the only way to be successful or, make your take the next step in your career or get a promotion. And certainly we've seen this really shift a lot with COVID. I mean, so many of us are working from home. I'm just now starting to see bigger companies reopen brick and mortar spaces and requiring employees going back into the office. So I think about, this is kind of, now I'm getting off into a different topic. So let me reel it back in and talk about how do we do this thing called self-care and still propel our careers forward? Is that possible? How do we do it?
Oh, it absolutely is possible. And it's interesting that everyone I know who has changed their schedule, now, tougher to do, I completely acknowledge when you're in the first couple of years of your career. And that might be a slightly different picture. We can talk about that too, if you'd like. But certainly for anybody who's been in the workplace for a while, you need to do something that's sustainable. And as you get more successful, which hopefully everyone listening will, I can tell you from my own experience and from my observation, as you get more successful, more opportunities and more bigger tasks and more requests for your time and for conversations and meetings and everything, all of that, more and more of it comes your way. And it's easy enough, or relatively easy. It's always hard to say no, but it's a lot easier to say no to something you don't want to do.
Mhm.
But when there are, and I'm struggling with this right now myself, but when there is an overload of things that you do want to do, if you don't find the way to set those limits, you're going to crash and burn, and you're not going to be good at anything. Researchers at Stanford actually set out to figure out what the ideal amount of work is for productivity in a week, and it turns out to be right around 40 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And as you start adding on more hours, you lose productivity, and pretty quickly you get to the point where you're getting less done than if you had quit at the 40 hours. And if I think about the most successful people that I know, they do set very strict boundaries about when they're working and when they're not. Mm-hmm. So COVID, as you say, COVID kind of blew a lot of that out of the water. But truthfully, it was already happening before COVID. COVID just kind of accelerated a bunch of stuff. Mm-hmm. Just like even before COVID, I, who live on the West Coast, work mostly for people who live on the East Coast. I spent a lot of time on Zoom. But before COVID, often I was the only one who was on Zoom, and the rest of them were together in a room, which kind of sucked. When everybody was all together on Zoom, that was a lot more fun. But so all of this stuff, it just got accelerated by the pandemic. So before I wrote part of this book before the pandemic even happened. And before the pandemic even happened, I started writing the second chapter, which is called The Disappearing Line Between Work and Life. Mm. And it was all about how work is intruding on our lives, but also our lives are showing up more at work. And we have to figure out, each of us has to figure out that combination for ourselves. So, but I feel like I've sort of gone around the side of answering your question instead of actually answering it. Do you want me to like go straight down the middle of it for a second?
Yeah, if you would, if you feel like.
Sure. So, so I think a lot of us think that working longer hours is the way to be more successful. Mm-hmm. In fact, Elon Musk said something about this that, if you think about it, is really absurd. A lot of what he says is absurd, I have to say. But he said, it's simple math. If you work 50 hours a week, if your competition works 50 hours a week and you work 100 hours a week, then you'll get twice as much done. Now, think about that for a second. Will you really get twice as much done if you work 100 hours a week? So now a week has 168 hours in it. We know from a lot of brain science that shorting yourself on sleep will not only literally shorten your life and make you more prone to Alzheimer's and a lot of other stuff you don't want, but it actually makes you less productive too. Being short of sleep is the same as being drunk. And if you go 9 nights in a row of 6 hours of sleep, that's the same as a blood alcohol level of 0.10%, which would make it illegal for you to drive in most places. So don't short yourself on sleep. So let's say roughly 60 hours of those 168 hours are spent sleeping, climbing into bed, falling asleep. Mm-hmm. So what would it be like to work 100 hours a week? Well, you get up, you brush your teeth as fast as ever you can. You sit down at your desk. You have every meal at your desk. You stay there right up until it's time to go to sleep, or just about, maybe you take an hour to say hi to your kids and go to sleep. And you do that 7 days a week, every day of your life. Will you really be more productive? I think most of us kind of know that the answer to that is no. So you can't just keep adding on hours. The question is, what are you doing in those hours? And again, the brain science here, and I love following the work of a guy named Josh Davis, who wrote a book called 2 Awesome Hours, which I highly recommend because it's a very quick read. It's a short book. And he's a brain expert, and he figured out that each of us in the course of a workday, normally speaking, if we work at it and we pay attention to that happy, healthy, and at ease thing I said before, we can have about 2 hours of really awesome work where we're like what we call in the zone. And we've probably all had this experience where, you look at the clock. It's been an hour and a half since the last time you looked at the time. And during that hour and a half, a lot of great work got done. And you're not even quite sure how. You were just like, wow, I was really in the flow there. We can have 2 hours of that. And it's a better idea to try and do that than to just tack more and more hours on to the end or the beginning of the day and hope that somehow we'll get everything done by like forcing ourselves.
Thank you, Minda. I love all of that brain science. And tell me the name of the book again, the short little book.
The short little book is called 2 Awesome Hours. The author is Josh Davis. It's been out for a while. And it's a pretty quick read, but he has a lot of super practical information. There's also, I wrote some columns that kind of boil down his information into a variety of tips that you can also find on Inc.com if you search me and brain or something. But a lot of the stuff that makes us more able to have this awesome work periods is about figuring out what makes us our most efficient, and often that's also what makes us our healthiest. So getting outside, a little bit of exposure to nature, so extraordinarily good for the body and the mind that in Japan, exposure to nature, depending on how you do it, is actually covered by your health insurance. It's that important. And it has measurable medical benefits. There's research that shows that people in the hospital who have a view of trees outside actually recover faster than people who are looking at, a stone wall or something. It's an amazingly beneficial. So things like that, a reasonable amount of exercise, a little bit of brisk exercise will absolutely jumpstart your brain. Eating, strangely enough, eating fat and not carbs, because your brain eats fat. So he says, maybe put cream in your coffee, but not sugar. All these kinds of things, if you bring them all together, can help you get that focus and that creativity. There's also a lot of brain science that shows the incredible power of taking a break from what you're doing. So this is why some people love, including me, and maybe some of your listeners love the Pomodoro technique, where you work 25 minutes, take a 5-minute break. Once you've done that 4 times, you take a longer break. The breaks are incredibly important for our learning and our imagination. Actually, I found this out in a very strange way when many years ago, when my husband and I on our anniversary took a Segway tour, of all things. So I don't know if you've ever been on a Segway. It's the first time and probably the last time I'll ever have done it. But I get on this. So my husband is good at all things mechanical, zoomed off on his Segway, and we were following a guide who was also obviously very comfortable on his Segway. And it's not that I couldn't do it, but I couldn't do it well. And I was like struggling to keep up with them and struggling to feel like I was, I didn't feel like I was going to fall off. It's got a gyroscope, but it wasn't coming naturally to me at all. And then we took a break. And interestingly, to what I just said about nature, we took a break in a beautiful park overlooking a river. And we didn't talk about the Segways. We talked about, chit-chatted about other stuff. 15 minutes later, I get back on and magically I can ride the Segway. So what happened? I was completely mystified about it at the time. Since then, I've read a lot more about the brain, and I learned that the prefrontal cortex, which is what we call attention, which is what focuses on things, that was working really hard when I was trying to ride the Segway. When you stop focusing, other parts of your brain come into play and new neural pathways can form. So that's what was going on during that 15-minute break. And it made this huge, huge, huge difference. So taking breaks is when learning happens. Taking breaks is when connections happen, and connections are really what drive creativity. So if you think about that cliche of, I had the brilliant idea in the shower, that's why. Think about when you've had your brightest ideas, and I'll bet you that most of them were not when you were sitting at your desk. You were taking a walk. You were maybe having coffee with a friend, maybe, sitting in a rowboat somewhere or something. That's when that happens. And that's why breaks are so important.
Yeah. It's usually for me, I'm like, oh, I got to write that down. And nowhere in sight is paper or pen. And my hands are usually busy doing something like riding my bike.
Right. Yeah. Riding your bike is a great example, because it's sort of like driving or something. It takes some part of your brain and it leaves some part of your brain to wander. And that wandering part, and that is a perfect recipe for creativity.
Yeah. I also think often about the adage to sleep on it. If you're trying to make a decision, a tough decision, or similarly, if you're trying to solve a problem or learn something new, like studying for a test. It feels to me like there's this something, I don't know if there's any research that you've done about the dream realm or the what happens to the brain when we sleep in terms of the information that we absorbed before we went to bed and then when we wake up. Perhaps it's similar to taking a break. Prefrontal cortex turns off, I imagine. And then
and more so. And yet there is research. So just to be clear, I'm not a researcher, so I just read research. I haven't actually done it, but there is research about where they taught somebody something. They had subjects, they taught people at different times of day, and in some cases they taught them, in the evening, and then saw what happened when they woke up in the morning. And absolutely, those connections happen in our sleep. I mean, absolutely magical stuff happens when we sleep, which is why we really need to make it a priority. But yes, absolutely. And, we've probably all had this experience where something, we couldn't figure something out, and then we went to sleep, and then in the morning we woke up. My husband he's now a full-time musician, but for many years he worked on computers, and he was the local computer repair guy in a little town where he lived. And he was always finding strange creative ways to cobble back together ancient computers that probably should have been chunked. So one night we were sleeping, and during the night he was like, I don't know, he was kind of like doing weird things on my shoulder with his hand or something. I was like, what are you doing? And in the morning he said, oh, well, I just figured out, apparently while I was asleep, how to fix this computer. And I was like, yeah, I guess you did.
So yeah, was he dreaming? Was he dreaming while he was doing
I guess it was dreaming, or his brain was somehow processing it. I'm not sure if it, we don't remember. Science tells us we actually don't remember most of our dreams. We have REM sleep every night, but we don't necessarily always remember. So maybe it was some form of dreaming, but it was some form of, non-prefrontal cortex processing. Yes, very often sleep on it does have a lot of validity. Very often we figure things out in our sleep. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I remember learning that when I was young and applying it because I danced a lot. So we'd have to remember choreography, and my teacher would always suggest that I visualize in my sleep the steps before I went to bed, which is what I would do. I would sleep, and then I'd get up and I'd be like, my body knows how to do it. It wasn't a brain. To me, it felt like, okay, I have absorbed this into my body, and now it's just kind of a motor skill. So I want to change gears a little bit to something you talk about in the book. I believe this is from page 181. Not that you need to have that memorized. But the question is, well, we kind of touched on this already, the topic of success. And you talk about what the dirty little secret to success is.
Yeah. So the dirty little secret about success is that in some way there is no such thing. And, or maybe what I mean is there is no such destination. And the reason I say that is because I've had this experience, and maybe some of your listeners have too, or maybe if you're just starting out, you haven't. So we need to warn you that you will, which is that you set yourself a goal, and it's a big achievement, and you really strive to get there. And at first it seems impossibly distant, and then you work towards it and you get closer, and the closer you get, the less magical it seems. And by the time you actually get to this big goal that you had, you already have another further along goal. So there really, for most of us, there really is no point in our lives where we get to a point and say, wow, this is it, I'm successful. It just, it kind of doesn't happen. My parable for this in the book, if that's the word, if you can use parable for something that actually happened, was Jeff Bezos's search for HQ2, the second headquarters of Amazon outside of Seattle. And I don't know if you remember, any of your listeners remember, it was big news, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, that Amazon was going to build a new headquarters, and it was going to pick a city, and it invited all the cities in America, and I guess the world, and states and things, to bid to make offers of what kind of support they would give to Amazon. So 38 cities and counties and things sprang into action, and they put together these elaborate bids where they offered all kinds of tax breaks and, credits and whatever. And they whittled it down. It was more than 200 actually. Sorry, I think I got that number wrong. They whittled it down to I think a final 20. I'm going to get the numbers wrong because I haven't looked at them in a while. And invited them to, sweeten the deal some more. And they finally, after all of this, they finally wound up with a neighborhood in Queens, New York, and Northern Virginia. So the neighborhood in Queens, New York, so they were going to go, so first of all, they had split what they had promised in half. They were going to get instead of this big HQ2, there was going to be half an HQ2 here and another half there. So they offered they offered this to both these locations. So in Queens, they started getting pushback from the local community. That was kind of like, we didn't realize you were getting these gigantic incentives. We're not sure. They didn't really need more employment that much of that kind. They were like, we're not so sure about this. So as soon as there started being community pushback, Amazon pulled out of the deal. They might have been able to go forward with it. It wasn't clear, but they said, no, if you don't want us, we're out. So they wound up with Northern Virginia, which was a place where they already had a huge amount of offices and were in any case planning to expand. So even before this all happened. So the end result of all of this was essentially nothing except a bunch of embarrassment and aggravation. So like a year and a half after this, Bloomberg did an investigative report and came out with the news that this entire event was kicked off because Elon Musk and Tesla got huge incentives for building a giant battery factory somewhere in the desert in Nevada. And it was in the billions. And when an executive in Amazon was crowing about getting 40 million in incentives from, I think, Cleveland for building something there, Jeff Bezos said, I don't want tens of millions, I want billions. So because he was envious of Tesla, this whole thing started. Now, think about that for a moment. Jeff Bezos was, at that time, the richest person in the world. He had built this behemoth that we all depend on for everything, for web services, as well as, our packages, as well as all this other publishing and everything, food. Really, there are very few parts of our lives that Amazon is not in the process of taking over. He had built this probably most successful company in the history of the world. And he was the richest man in the world. And he didn't feel successful. He was still capable of being envious of someone else. So think about that for a second. There is no place where we feel like, okay, we've gotten there. Because if Jeff Bezos can't, the rest of us certainly can't. So success is, I think, we need to start from the concept that success is now. Success is here. We're all successful, just the way we are. And maybe we'll go on to achieve more, just like Jeff Bezos apparently wants to do, or not. But where we are right now has to be good enough, has to feel successful, has to be celebrated, because that moment in the future where we're going to go, we're successful, it does not really exist.
Yeah, I've certainly felt that for myself when I set goals, reach them, and then you get there and it feels like everyone around you kind of looks at you and wants you to celebrate. And certainly you feel like, at least this is what seems to happen for me. There's a little bit of feeling like, well, do I deserve to celebrate this?
Mm-hmm.
Was I good enough? Do I actually deserve this? And so there's a little twist of psychology in there too. But I certainly, yeah, that's a little bit depressing, but I do love the call to action that the success is now. So thank you for ending on a positive note, Minda. I want to ask you about a couple of different topics. One at top of mind for me right now, because I just restarted and recommitted to my journaling practice, which has been kind of ebbing and flowing throughout my whole life. But you have a concept called power journaling. And this is discussed in the book around page 41, I believe. So tell me about power journaling. What is it and how can it help us reach our goals?
Okay, so the first and most important thing I want to say about journaling is that it's absolutely individual, and it should be something that you want to do and something that you enjoy doing. And if that's not true, then find a different approach. And when I say journaling, for me, that means writing on a piece of paper, but it doesn't have to be. Journaling can take, it's any form in which you examine your own thoughts and ideas and plans and make some sort of a record of it. That could be doodling, that could be turning on a video camera and talking into it. There's an episode of Grace and Frankie that I absolutely love where Grace can't figure out what to do. And Frankie says, you have to vlog. And she insists. And so finally, even though she feels silly, Grace turns on the camera and starts talking into it. Sure enough, she figures out what she needs to do. So when I say journaling, that consider that the code word for whatever fulfills that for you. So I just wanted to start there. So for me, a writer, somebody who loves ink pens and notebooks, it does mean writing with a fountain pen in a notebook by hand. Could be typing on a screen, could be talking into your phone, but that's what it is for me. And I, like you, I guess, have been doing it all my life, probably more on than off. And for many, many years, the whole purpose of my journaling was basically to express the constant change of moods that I had. Usually negative moods is what would send me to the journal. So if I was angry at someone or upset about something or worried about something, and it's great for that. And that's how I started. And then at some point I watched Ryder Carroll's 3-minute video about bullet journaling. Now, so bullet journaling is something completely different from what I just described. Bullet journaling is, he calls it a productivity tool. It's a way to make plans, to keep a record. A lot of it is kind of what you might do on your computer, keep a record of appointments, but also make notes about things you did during a day or things that you want to do, goals, plans, record information. So, and the brilliant innovation about bullet journaling, which is so simple but so smart, is that you actually number the pages of your journal and create an index, which magically means that you don't have to go looking for something. Oh, what did I write down about that? You can find it in the index. So I kind of put those things together, and for me created something really powerful where I write down my plans, my ambitions, goals, things that I want to achieve, stuff that I want to make sure gets done sometime in the next few months because it'll take me to the next step where I'm going, things that I want to make sure get done this week. And by that, I don't mean deadlines I already have. I mean things that, could get forgotten if I don't check on them. And then also, my moods, my things, things that I'm feeling happy or unhappy about. One thing I've added, because we talked about sleep and the last thing you think about before you go to sleep, one thing I've added that I think is really powerful is to take 30 seconds at the end of the day and write down what you did well that day, what you achieved that day, what happened that day that was good, because it puts you in that mindset, especially if you're someone like me that gets to the end of the day and thinks, oh, I didn't get anything done today. Well, write down what you did get done, and not, I wrote, I worked out for half an hour, even though I thought it should have been an hour. No, I worked out for half an hour. That's good. Stop there. And I write down one priority for the following day too, when I do that. But so there's many different ways to approach it. But for me, the essential thing about journals is that they give you a bigger view of your life, right? And your work life and your real life, because day to day we're in it. It's the balance of the urgent and the important. The journal can keep you focused on what's actually important, because you think, okay, I thought it was really important to go, send out this pitch, apply for this job, follow this dream, stuff that your current boss isn't going to be encouraging you to do because there's work to do right now. Your journal will remind you is really important to get to.
I love that. Yeah. It's such the Artist's Way, Julia Cameron.
Yes. And I actually, there's a step in there that I probably skipped where I read The Artist's Way and I started writing I kind of started doing morning pages. I've never
Mhm.
been super consistent about it. Morning pages, for
Yeah.
those of you who have not read The Artist's Way, is 3 pages of stream of consciousness writing that you're
Mhm.
supposed to do every morning to jumpstart your creative process. And journaling will jumpstart your creative process. Absolutely.
Yeah, I did that. I did my morning pages this morning, that's when I talk about journaling, it's usually more of an artist's way style, because I feel like, to me, it's akin to meditation. It's kind of clearing the cobwebs from the mind. So
Mm-hmm.
anything that's feeling negative, feeling like I can't sort out this issue, I can just kind of babble it out. And it doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to be grammatically correct. Nobody's going to read it. I'm not turning it in. It's not being graded. And
Right.
it's just a way to process emotionally and mentally for me. So, yes, all of those forms of journaling, love it. I want to be mindful of your time, but I do want to try to get through 2 more questions.
Okay.
Um, the first one I think is so important because I think many, many of us, and I've been in this situation myself, have said this at least once in our lives: I hate my job. What should we do if we're stuck in a job we hate and we
Yeah.
feel stuck, right?
Right. And I've had jobs I hated too. Not in a long time, fortunately, but um, so at the time that I wrote the book, and this is maybe still true, but it's becoming a little bit less true. It was a really great time to hate your job because there's unemployment is so low that it's almost a given that no matter who you are or where you are, there would be other opportunities. We see the economy is in the process of shifting to something else. Whether that'll still be true and for how long, we don't know. Um, so I mean, it's super easy to say, well, if you hate your job, just quit. Okay. um, that, but that's not realistic or, sensitive. So I think if you're stuck in a job that you hate, the first thing is to do exactly the sort of thing we were just talking about, something like journaling or something else that would make you a bit more introspective, and figure out exactly what it is that you hate about your job. Because the answer to that, okay, I dread going to work in the morning. Yeah, okay, we've been there. But the answer to exactly why you dread going to work in the morning is going to determine what sorts of solutions you can try, right? If it's just like having to get up and put on grown-up clothes and leave your kids behind and get on the, some awful form of public transportation or sit in traffic and get to the office, maybe there's some work at home solution that would make that better. If it's the work that you're actually doing day to day doesn't feel significant to you, then maybe it's a different type of job, or even within the job you already have, taking on some projects that do feel more significant or meaningful, or looking for those opportunities. For many, many people, when they say they hate their job, it's not so much a what as a who. A lot of people quit because they have a manager or maybe even a coworker that they really dislike or that they really feel doesn't treat them well. If that's the case, then there's solutions to that might be about finding someone else in the same organization to work with, seeing if you can spend more of your time doing stuff away from the person that is making you crazy, making a lateral move altogether. Um, and of course, in and among all the things that I just said, is looking for other work in another organization, which can also be the solution to a lot of these problems. But I think the most important thing about, if you say you hate your job, is not to say I hate my job and then not do anything about it, not even try to do anything about it. Because I think it's really easy for all of us, especially when you're talking about something that's around our livelihood, which feels like survival to us. It's very easy for us to kind of stay stuck in something that makes us miserable. It applies to relationships too. And it's important, whether or not you actually can move on from a job, or for that matter, a relationship that's making you unhappy. It's important not to just kind of throw up your hands and go, okay, this part of my life is not fixable. it's always worth it to try. It's always worth it to explore and see if there's something else that could make you less unhappy.
I love that answer. Okay, so last question. Although I'm like, oh, do I want this to be the last question? I want there to be many more questions, but I'm so curious by this one. This is one that came from the publicist of our suggested list of questions, and it has my interest piqued. So I'm going to ask you, what's wrong with most workplaces today?
Well, that would be a long list. But it kind of circles back to what we started talking about. And I think we have this, especially somehow in the United States, because we're built on a Puritan tradition that seems to affect everything that we think and do even today. Most workplaces don't want to acknowledge or support the fact that the people doing the work are still human beings, and first and foremost human beings. And as human beings, we have we need things like sleep and rest. We also we have emotions, we have moods. Sometimes things are funny, sometimes things are infuriating, and sometimes we dislike each other, sometimes we like each other. But workplaces need to take into account everything that makes up a human being, including the things that happen outside work. Oh, don't bring your outside work problems to work. Well, nonsense. Not in this day and age. Maybe there was a time when the factory whistle blew at 5 p.m. and you were done with work and didn't ever have to think about it till the next morning. But that's not the time that we live in now. And we need people talk about bringing your whole self to work, being passionate, being all in. If I'm all in, then you've got the whole human being that I am. And you need to support everything about that human being, even the things, even if I broke up with my boyfriend, even if there's something else going on in my life that takes me away from work temporarily some of the time. Other times, work will temporarily take me away from life. We need to have all of that holistic view of the human being in the workplace, and for the most part, we don't.
Yeah, thank you. Minda, I almost called you Melinda. That was
worse things have happened.
Minda, is there any one thing that you hope people take away from this book or this conversation? Or I think I'll stop there. I was going to continue to ask you more questions, but I'll let you answer.
So one thing that kind of end the book on this note, and one thing that I love to talk about as a kind of concluding thought is our duty to be happy. So for the book, I interviewed Gretchen Rubin, who does a lot of, has made a whole career out of researching happiness, or reading all the research about happiness. And she quoted Robert Louis Stevenson to me about the duty to be happy. And that's interesting. We don't think of it that way, right? We think, if we're doing our duty, then we're not happy. And we're not pursuing our own happiness. And if we're pursuing our own, right, it's kind of like what we started, self-care or career, right? If we're pursuing our own happiness, then we're not doing our duty. But in fact, the two things are connected, because happier people are, the research shows, better citizens, more likely to volunteer, more likely to make charitable donations, less likely to commit a crime. Better parents, absolutely better parents, better partners, better bosses if you are in any kind of leadership position. All of that stuff, you will do better if you are happy. So I think we all have that, as to your point about being stuck in a job that makes you unhappy. We all have that responsibility, without harming others, of course, while taking care of the people that we care about, of course, to make ourselves as happy as we can be, because we'll show up for our jobs and for the rest of our lives in a better way if we are.
That's such a beautiful note to end on. I love that. Minda, it's been such a pleasure to speak with you today. Where can people go to find out more about you, to pick up a copy of your book, to follow you?
Well, the book is any place that you could buy a book, it should be there. you can find my column on Inc.com. And if you come to mindazetlin.com, you can find everything. So the book, the column, sign up for my newsletter, sign up for daily texts that are kind of a lot like what we've just been saying for the past half hour that I send out to hundreds of people every day. There's all kinds of different ways to get inside my brain, and I would love to be in touch.
That's great. And Zetlin is Zetlin.
Correct. So it's Minda Zetlin, MindaZetlin.com.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate your time. Well, everyone, that concludes another amazing episode of Outside the Studio. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I hope you learned something new, maybe remembered something old, maybe felt inspired to apply something to your life. You can hear my dog in the background. She's doing a little happy dance. So Daisy enjoyed it. Anyhow, I wanted to just pop in here to wrap us up to say a couple of things. Number one, I have such an amazing team that helps me put these podcasts together. Without them, I wouldn't be able to bring these amazing conversations to you. So thank you to my producer, my director of creative services, my sound editor, my engineer, Consistency Media. Don't know what I would do without you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And the amazing creation and artistic musical genius, Drew Lovern. Thank you so much for putting together this music specifically for Outside the Studio. So unique to the show, only place you're ever going to hear it is right here. Thanks, you guys. You make my world go round. Stay well, everyone. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review, share on the socials, especially if it's a show that you think, hey, this could help somebody else. That's what this is all about, right? We're sharing information so that we're better, so that we're inspired, so that we're lifting each other up, and we're learning how to be in this world, living on this planet to the best of our ability, sharing information and inspiring one another. And that's my hope. That's my hope for the show. Take care.